Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending today's event, which has been organised by our Inclusion Advisory Group. And I'll let Colin King, the chair of our IAG, explain a bit more about the event in a minute. My name's Lee O'Connor. I'm the CEO of Middlesex FA, and I'm going to facilitate today's events. This seminar has been arranged to showcase and celebrate the work that we do, and also look at the actions that are needed to address equality and discrimination in our game as we move forward. Today's seminar will be interactive, and we've got some excellent guest speakers that have given up their time to support our work today. They're going to share their views and highlight some of the work that they've been doing within their own respective organisations. And I'll introduce them as each of them and come on to speak a bit later. We want today's session to generate debate and create ideas about how effective our current practices are, and also what do we need to do differently to make our game truly representative of the community we serve. Middlesex FA has recently launched its new strategy, Leading from the Front, which is built on a mission of modernising, rebuilding and growing the game for everybody. Full details of that strategy is on our website, and I please urge you all to read that. But one of the key objectives of that strategy is to make sure that Middlesex FA is relevant, fit for purpose, and to make equality a reality. And in order for us to achieve that, we've got some clear objectives. One is around making sure we've got the right corporate governance structure that that enables us to be successful. We need to have a diverse and high-performing workforce, both paid and volunteering. And we need to make sure that equality is embedded throughout the organisation. For every single part of the organisation, equality needs to be embedded. And we need to make sure we collaborate with the whole Middlesex community to ensure that they feel part of Middlesex football. I do hope you enjoyed today's event. Please do ask questions at the appropriate times. I'm going to hand over to Colin in a minute, but just in terms of some housekeeping, we are recording today's events, so please do let us know if that is not okay for anyone in the chat, or raise your hand. If you can remain unmuted and with your cameras off unless you're speaking, that will just help the bandwidth of the call. And please, like I said, we want this to be interactive, so if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat function or raise your hand, and we'll come to you at the appropriate time. We will have a short break during the event in about an hour's time after the guest speakers, and before we go into a Q&A session where all of the panel speakers will be there to answer your questions, as will myself and Colin. So get thinking about your questions now, so we can have a really good debate at the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Colin King now. Colin is the chair of our Inclusion Advisory Group. Colin's going to talk about the work of IAG, why it's so important, and some of the programs they've got coming up in the near future. So Colin, over to you.
Great, and thank you very much, Lee, for the pleasant introduction, and I just thank you for all your contributions to really addressing a really important subject. Thank you for everybody that's given up their lunch break. I know this is a difficult time, but hopefully you'll enjoy the session. Hello? You can go to my first slide. So we wanted people to be really clear about what taking the knee is, why it's so important in sport, and historically what it actually means. And anybody who actually has done some research, taking the knee emerged from the period of slavery and the colonial period, when unfortunately people who were enslaved were forced to take the knee as a moment, an example of being subservient. It's actually evolved and developed and changed this meeting. It's become much more progressive as a means of protest. So taking the knee back in 1780 was actually dehumanizing people of difference, which really were slaves from the African continent. It changed its momentum when slaves said that we want to take the knee but not be subservient to our white slave masters. Just want to make that really clear, because lots of people have confused what is taking knee. Since that important message has been adopted, reinterpreted by the civil rights movements of the 1965 and the March on Selma by Dr. Martin Luther King. It's adopted by American sport, and it's actually become a really popular way of actually people showing their resistance to what we call racism in society, in sport, and inequalities, and how we address it together. Just go on to the next slide, please. A quick survey, and it's quite interesting that, and Simone will do an excellent appraisal about why this is so important, but if you look at the countries throughout Europe and the world, there's been contrasting responses to how people feel the importance of taking the knee. Some people think it's a political message that associates with Black Lives Matter. Some people think it's purposeless, but it's quite interesting that Britain probably is the leaders in thinking that this is a really important way of addressing race equality in sports. And this is a survey conducted with fans across the globe quite recently, looking at the importance of tackling racism in football. Just go on to the next page, please. So what do we actually do in the advisory board? My responsibility of chair is to make this the most important part of the work we actually do inside the board, in the FA, and across the family and stakeholders in the game. We're not saying Black History Month is a month in October. For us, it's a month, it's a year, it's a movement, it's a campaign that will infiltrate and actually affect everything we do in our work, from the board, the council, the staff, and the committee. So next year, we want to make sure we celebrate concrete targets. One of the first things we will try to address is clear race equality targets, known as KPIs, key performance indicators. We want to make sure they're realistic but relevant to the Middlesex area county. We are the most diverse county in the whole country. 41% of Middlesex FA are known as the new term ethnically diverse. We have and will implement the first ever EAG race equality training, which will be for volunteers, clubs, leagues, staff. We use the right language, the right action, and we will develop for each of our committee structures individual targets, whether that be in refereeing, coaching, women's football, on the board, but most importantly, we need to change the governance structure so groups who are actually part of these systems have much more political rights and voting outcomes. We will actually try to address the equality intermediate stage, but we want to look at celebrating that by next year. And lastly, today's event is really crucial. I really, really thank all the people that have given up their time from the professional game, because this gives us the first discussion about how we benchmark, how do we work across different aspects of the game, how we strategically align some of the challenges. So next year, we can actually say Black History Month is achieving concrete outcomes. It's not a tick box. Thank you for that short presentation. I think we can go on to the next speaker.
Thanks, Colin. There's no questions as yet. So like I said, if you think of any questions, please save them for the Q&A, and we'll have a good old debate. So next, I'm glad to welcome Simone Pound, who's the Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the PFA. So Simone, welcome. I'll let you talk about your background and then go into your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation and welcome everybody. My name is Simone Pound and I am Director of EDI at the PFA, which is the Professional Footballers Association, the union for professional players in England and Wales. We represent the 4,500 current pros who are playing in the across the leagues, as well as the 50,000 plus former players who we also support. So I'm here today to talk to you about a bit of the work that goes on behind the scenes. To give you a bit of background, the work that I do isn't carried out by me alone. I have a fantastic team. I've got Jason Lee, Terry Angus, Riz Rahman, and we've recently been, our newest signing is Fern Whelan, who has come on board to replace our star striker, or one of our star strikers, Ify Nora, who left us to head up the newly formed EDI team at the Premier League. Could we go on to my first slide, please? So yes, just in terms of the work that goes on behind the scenes, as the intro said, I've been in post for the best part of 20 years. I've known Colin for the majority of that time, and we've obviously seen a lot of change over the course of those 2 decades. However, racism and discrimination have been prevalent, not just in football, but across society. And despite maybe 10 years ago, people thinking the problems were solved, we know that racism never went away. And much of the work that we do is to address and tackle that. More recently, we've seen the rise of the far right in America and across Europe, which has really emboldened racists, I think, with their rhetoric. And Brexit also cemented divisions within our own country. And we've seen a massive spike in incidents in domestic football and also internationally faced by our England players. That kind of significant spike in hate crimes is across society and not just football, but obviously from a football and football players' perspective, it was very real and ever present. I think kind of 2017, 2018 season, we saw a massive rise in incidents targeting players in the stadium and on social media. And by 2019, really, there's only so many statements that you can make condemning racism and racist actions. And the team decided that we wanted to do something stronger, to take some action. And the idea was formulated for a social media boycott. We'd obviously seen a massive spike in abuse online. And it really came to fore in April 2019 when we worked with a group of players who had kind of influence within the dressing room, talked to them about our idea. I guess from a union perspective, a lot of people think of unions as striking. And we thought, let's do a strike on social media. So people like Adebayo Akinfenwa, Troy Deeney, Danny Rose, Wes Morgan, all helped us to do a very covert operation. We didn't tell any of our colleagues other than the players, and ambushed the platforms with this boycott, which saw a global reach of 1.9 billion. What it did, most importantly, I think, was to raise the issues that players were facing online to the platforms. And they immediately, pretty much the next day, reached out to us for meetings and to discuss the issues that players were facing online. We had a number of meetings, took players with us to talk about the issues that they were facing, had reams of evidence of what that abuse looked like, what that hate speech looked like. And at the time, realized very quickly, actually, that these kind of big tech companies spoke a very different language, and we needed to get some data science and some evidence that highlighted not just rhetorically what players and other people in the wider community were facing, so that we could have some action and evidence that action. We also knew that there were AI solutions that we needed to explore. And so over the past few years since the campaign, that's what we've been doing. I'm not sure if you're aware, hopefully you are, of the reports that we've released over that time, the first being Project Restart, and looking at the abuse that was faced during that time of lockdown. One of the key findings from that I find really significant to this day is the use of emojis, the weaponization of emojis. And over a third of the abuse that players receive is in the form of emojis. This was really key because we needed the platforms and wider society to understand that weaponization of emojis has a significant impact on grassroots, on younger children who, by using a monkey emoji or a banana emoji or a gorilla emoji towards Black players, was almost normalizing the narrative of and dehumanization of Black people. The next report that we used was when the season commenced and we got fans back in stadiums. And over the course of that season, we saw that the problems were significantly increasing, that speaking up caused repercussions for players, and really just a very unfortunate and tragic state of affairs, that the abuse was widespread, and not just in the UK, but not just overseas, but in the UK as well. Just going to take a bit of water, excuse me. So in terms of next steps, we saw a much wider social media boycott in April 21. And this was a collective effort from the football industry, from colleagues at the FA, the EFL, and the Premier League, who all pushed, as well as Kick It Out, of course, who all pushed and worked hard to engage our sponsors, media partners, broadcasters, and commercial partners to come together for the boycott in April 21. And I think the significance of that boycott was the collective effort, and to demonstrate to players and the platforms that what is taking place online has an impact on wider society and is not acceptable. Can I have my next slide, please? Okay, so in terms of the strategy and how things work, I always think of it as the 4 Ps. So we're looking at players, the platforms, Parliament, and the police. And those 4 Ps have formed a massive part of work over the past 2 years to really get to grips with the issues that we're facing and working towards solutions. Law enforcement is, of course, a vital part of any societal programme, and we have been working closely with the UK Football Policing Unit, looking at players reporting incidents and ensuring that perpetrators are held to account. I think it's really key for everyone to see real life consequences for online behaviours. Most recently, we had Rian Brewster and his case, which he really eloquently spoke out about the importance of players reporting incidents. But we also understand that historically and societally, there are and is a resistance to work with the police, and we have to accept and work towards solutions for players to feel more comfortable and confident on reporting. In terms of platform interaction, I'm literally in dialogue with them, if not daily, then certainly weekly. We are pushing them very hard. We've presented them with a number of solutions. We are kind of restricted with what we can say because we're under NDA, but safe to say, as an industry, we are collectively pushing the platforms as hard as we can do for solutions. One of the, again, kind of examples of player power is the group that we've been working with. Anton Ferdinand has been a really significant part of that work, with other players, including Adebayo Akinfenwa again, Troy Deeney and Tyrone Mings, also colleagues within FIFPro, and in America with the Black Players for Change. And as a collective, we want to work to continue pushing the platforms with that kind of player power that we hope will have an impact. Also, and as importantly, of course, is the Online Harms Bill, which is currently being worked through Parliament. And what we can do as an industry, and what we are doing collectively from football, is to really push government. I think that football has historically and will continue to be a catalyst for change. And whilst the abuse that the players receive isn't in isolation, we know that MPs and people on the street receive horrific abuse as well. But what we can do as a collective from football is really use the experiences that players are facing to see some significant change through Parliament. And I guess most importantly is the players and the work that we need to do to help and support them. We know that racism is a trauma, and racist abuse online doesn't go away. It's there 24/7. It's on your mobile phone. Social media is a part and parcel of the majority of people's lives, and we really need to make sure that the trauma and impact of the abuse that players see is as supported as it possibly can be. So we've done a lot of work really setting up networks and solutions within the clubs to ensure that players receive the support that they need, even if they may not realise it. I think, again, I'm sure Anton Ferdinand wouldn't mind me using him as an example, that whilst you can shrug off or brush away abuse that you receive at the time, it can have a significant impact, and does have a significant impact on you going through your life. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, I think, yeah, this one. So in terms of the player support, my colleague Michael Bennett will be talking to you, and he heads up the wellbeing side of things from the PFA perspective. And that player support is really crucial, both from making clubs aware of the structures that need to be put around a player who faces abuse online, and also to make sure that there is that day-to-day check-in that players are supported for what they're experiencing. We've released player guidelines that outline a range of things that players can do to protect themselves from the abuse that they receive. But one of the things we always go back to the platforms saying is that at the moment, those solutions are victim-led, and they shouldn't be victim-led. They should be solutions-based from the platforms. So that's something that we continue to push and challenge. We now have a dedicated wellbeing helpline for any player who needs immediate support regarding the abuse that they receive. And we have counselling in place, and a network of counsellors across the country who are there should players wish to access that help. And again, the kind of club communication and interaction, both from the PFA and from the teams at the Premier League and EFL, and working with those clubs, often linking in with the police as well, is a really key and crucial part of the whole process. So that is, for me, a snapshot really of the work that's taking place to address the issues that players are experiencing online. And I'm happy to take any questions when and if necessary.
Thanks, Simone. And we've got one question in the chat. So from John Taylor, who's the chair of Middlesex FA. Do you get the impression that social media companies are serious in wanting to address the issues of online abuse? And will they take any action independently as a result of campaigns and public pressure, or wait until they are forced to comply by legislation?
I think that they talk a really good game. They have people in positions who do external kind of communications on behalf of the platforms, who are able to convey that, you know, they take things very seriously and that they're working towards solutions. Having worked with them now over the past 3 years and on quite a regular basis, I would say that actions speak louder than words. And given the amount of technical knowledge and data and powers and resources that they have, surely there should be solutions found a lot quicker than now. So I think that the online harms bill is going to be quite a crucial part of holding them to account. But I equally feel that the work that we're doing with players and putting pressure on those platforms collectively as a football industry, but also more globally, using sponsors and brands is a really key part of that work.
Thanks, Simone. I've got another couple of questions as well from Clark Carlisle. What constitutes success for the PFA's work? Are they prescriptive with the outcomes that you are targeting?
Hi, Clark. What constitutes success for me in this space will be some significant changes to what we're currently facing, and that success will be measured by the work that we're doing as a collective. From a PFA perspective, I feel that we have a level of success in as much as we are working hard to address and tackle the issues that players are facing, and we're working hard with police and platforms to keep pushing that. So for me, success won't really take place until this is eradicated. But in the meantime, I feel, particularly as a union, that we're making significant strides and using the power and the collective power that the players have to push this issue forward. Thanks,
Simone. There's a couple of other questions, but I think to Thomas and Alan, we'll bring those up in the Q&A at the end just to try and keep things moving, but I will definitely come back to them. I'm now going to invite Iffy to speak. Simone referenced Iffy used to work for the PFA but has now moved to the Premier League. So welcome, Iffy. Can you see us? Yeah, I can see you. Floor's yours.
Good morning, or is it afternoon now? Good morning, everybody. Can I get any control of this? Because I just want to share a slide. I didn't mention this to Colin yesterday, but if I can. Oh, perfect. Someone's buzzing me. Can I do that? Can I share screen?
Is that?
Oh, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jacob and Lauren, is that possible?
Could be. I think hopefully Lauren might be able to look at it at the moment.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to talk over and then show the slides a little bit in a few minutes. That's fine.
Hi, Iffy, it's Colin. You all right?
Hi, Colin. How are you? You okay?
Yeah. Can I just say, just going back to Simone, that was outstanding. And this is about celebration, and we've got to celebrate. Simone is the leading global leader, Black female in the world. So I'm really pleased that she's here today. We don't big each other up, nobody will. I'm going to somebody who's equally big and has done something tremendous in his career as a coach, manager of Ethiopia. Think about that, the African state that was taken away to us during the post-colonial rule. That's unbelievable. So I'm going to big you up. This is a really challenging day today, and some of the questions Carl was fantastic. Iffy, where are we now from your experience as a player to a coach to a manager to where you are? Is the Enough campaign really addressing standing from the knee and addressing racism in football?
I think where we are is hard to gauge. I think we're in a better place, Colin. I think that's been hard won, as any campaign would tell you. There's a bit peaks and troughs, and I think we're possibly riding a little bit of a peak at the moment. And the fear is that it'll go off the agenda, and we've seen that happen before. But thankfully, we're still talking about it. We're having conversations like this. It's Black History Month again, which brings things into sharper focus. So I think we're in a good place in terms of the conversation. In terms of some of the outcomes, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the issues around underrepresentation throughout the game are structural. If there was the quick wins and low-hanging fruit, we'd all grab at it straight away, but it isn't. Some of the measures we're talking about in the game and trying to do are probably medium to long term, but it's important in the short term that we have conversations. I like some of the work Simone's done is fabulous with the PFA, and obviously was proud to be part of that as well. And the work we're trying to do at the Premier League as well. We've got to drive these forward in any campaign or any striving for parity and equality. It does take individuals to stand up and really drive it forward, and that's what I know Simone's done for many years. That's what we're trying to do now, and make sure the game's engaged with it. We're not going away. It was once upon a time, I think we could brush this stuff under the carpet, and to some extent I think that's what happened up until a couple of years ago. But I think everything that happened with the pandemic and George Floyd brought it out into the open, and now it's front and center. And if people are fed up, that's fine. We'll get fed up when there's full equality. But at the moment, that conversation's still going and carrying on and accelerating, and it needs to keep doing.
That's a great answer. Thanks for that. I'm going to ask you something a bit more challenging now. Simone made reference to the dehumanisation of the black body through sport. And today is really a memorial to somebody who lost their life, who was murdered by the police. Can you tell us your experience of playing with Dalian, and how did that affect you in terms of equality outside of the game?
I didn't actually play with Dalian, but I knew him when I first started playing. I made my debut for Huddersfield Town, and we'd see each other a lot of times. He was playing at Sheffield Wednesday at the time, and we'd sometimes bump into each other in Leeds. Got on really well with Dalian. Obviously went on to have a really top level career at Aston Villa and fringes the England team as well. He was a little bit of a kind of untapped talent, I think. I think if there's a Dalian Atkinson playing now in the Premier League, and he was, gracing the Premier League, I think with all the resources around the clubs these days, you'd probably get more out of him, and he'd be playing top level international football, I've got no doubt. I don't know whether he did or not. Someone might have to correct me on that. I think he had a couple of England caps, but no more than that. But he was definitely a talented player. Obviously, I lost touch. I don't know what happened in the subsequent years, but the first we heard, obviously, is what had happened to him and the circumstances, which are horrific and tragic, and having these conversations so much. And there was elements of this, with the George Floyd incidents, where these incidents have been happening for many years. And what worries me, Colin, is that where there's an acceptance that there's a problem, then I can live with that. But if people are putting out reports like the Sewell report denying any type of institutional racism, I have a problem, because you're in denial, and the facts speak for themselves. And some of the issues around deaths in custody, the use of tasers, disproportionate use of tasers, this doesn't matter whether I say them or not, whether they are what they are, and the facts speak out for them. So at some point, you got to take on that responsibility of recognizing it and seeing what you do about it, because this looked, again, not for the first time, and anecdotally of a situation that could and should have gone a totally different way, and it's a loss to the game, because, like I said, Sheffield Wednesday, Aston Villa fans will have some really fond memories of Dalian as a player, and I do as a person who I knew right at the beginning of his career.
Thank you very much. It's a very poignant, sad moment. Thanks for your reflection.
Thanks, mate. But just for clarity, I think we mentioned the word murder, but I think it was actually manslaughter, just so we're using the right terminology. Have you got any more questions, Colin?
Yeah, I see it as murder. Sorry, politically. Sorry. You want to see it as manslaughter? We can have a debate about that. I'm not going to challenge that today.
I'm just referring to the
yeah. We're going to go into that more detail, Leon, so thanks for picking it up. I want to pick up one last question while we wait for the PowerPoint. The onboard training, EAG, all these structures, are they really giving us more power in the game to make decisions and influence race equality?
Well, the problem is with that, and it's not a problem with the program itself at all. And I'm just thinking about that in regard to a program that we're talking about doing as well. Only yesterday we're talking about another program. What that has, in the same way that it gave coaching programs, allowed black players and underrepresented groups to be more qualified. What's happened as a result of the programs, you've had more qualified people who come through on board. You've got more qualified coaches, so there's greater mass of black coaches out there now. What we haven't got is the opportunities to go and be employed, and that's the challenge. So it's one of the things we're doing in Premier League, and this is the kind of model which we've used in coaching, but want to apply around executive pathways as well, is around placements. So they get a placement at a club. So we've got 12 cohorts currently. So it was a joint Premier League and PFA initiative. We've got 12 coaches who went through a really extensive program to get to them ready, and they're placed at 12 EFL clubs, 2 cohorts of 6. So the 12 EFL clubs now. Already one of them has been offered a permanent position, which is great. We'll wait and see what the first cohort of 6 are doing as they get to the end of their 23 months, as it is. The second cohort more or less just started, so we'll see. But for me, that's the key. It's not just being qualified; it's been having the opportunity to be employed, and that's the challenge. And we're trying to replicate that with executive pathways. We don't want to replicate the on-board program. We want to make it quite specific to, say, a Premier League club or a Premier League executive, and some of that will be a working group to find out what the content of that might look like. But the idea is they get placed as a board member for the duration of that program. It gives them hands-on experience, and it allows. And I think this isn't just a underrepresentation issue. It's a way players, particularly, unlike countries like Germany, where that tradition of moving from the playing arena to the board level is seamless, not even discussed as a problem. We don't have the same problem. Maybe that's a class problem here, but we're trying to change that narrative that not every player wants to go into coaching necessarily. And wonderful transferable skills that can be useful to a club, and it's trying to get the clubs to buy into that. So that's some conversations on both sides. We need to speak to the clubs. We need to speak to players or players come to the end of the career who've already finished the career who'd be interested in doing that. And I think that's been the change really for the last 18 months. We're trying to give hands-on experience to coaches or executives now, as opposed to just leaving the programs in place.
I think that's a really valid point, Iffy. I think when we look at the grassroots game, that's exactly the same scenario. It isn't just about playing. It can be about refereeing. It can be about coaching, sitting on committees. We need to just make sure that football is accessible to everyone and for every single role, whether it's pro game and grassroots as well. So it's a really valid point that you make. We do have access for you to share a slide if you wish to do so.
Right. I've said that now. I'm not sure how I would do it.
That's fine. We don't need to. We can pick it up in the Q&A if you feel more comfortable doing it that way.
Yes. Oh, here we go. Share screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. So I'll try and bring that to life a little bit more if I can. So this is our no room for racism action plan. I'll just reduce that. There you go. Hopefully you can see that a bit better. So this is our 6-point no room for racism action plan. So this was put in place before I joined the Premier League. So I'm, I guess, driving this forward. A lot of work has been done around coaching pathways already. That's in place. Some of the schemes we spoke about. The player pathways, lots of discussion, particularly around the recruitment of South Asian players, or the lack of visibility of South Asian players in the game. So I would say, for example, South Asian pathway is similar to what it was for black players a couple of generations ago, when we looked for pioneers like Sel Regis and Clyde Best in the 70s and 80s, and all the cultural things were thrown. Oh, it's too cold for players. We still hear a lot of that around pathways for South Asian players. It's a cultural thing. I think these are red herrings. We've got to look at how we're not attracting people from those backgrounds into the game, particularly in areas like, your Bradfords and your Leicesters, the West Midlands and London, with sizable South Asian communities. So that's a big thing we're talking about. Executive pathways we spoke about at the top. Supporting communities, again, Premier League does a lot of stuff, not always best at selling themselves, in my opinion, around some of the community schemes. I've watched the community schemes in action at clubs like Man City, just down the road from where I am, and Everton as well, do some really good stuff. So we're supporting that around our action plan. Action against racism, I think Simone mentioned a lot around the social media platforms. Again, we're all waiting to see what happens with the online safety bill when it hits the statute books. Whether it will be the one-stop panacea, I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical. Although obviously all that's happened more recently with the Facebook whistleblower means that I think the narrative is very much of doing that. So we'll see what comes of that. Hopefully there'll be some real initiatives going forward. I'm not sure how that will impact on their business model for things like ID verification for the big platforms. I think that's full square against their business model. And no, Simone mentioned about whether they really want to do anything about it. I just think as a business for them, there's no such thing as bad news. Hate speech drives content, drives advertising, drives platform use. It's just news for them, and that's what they're in the business of. So unless you come at it from a slightly different angle, which we're talking about internally, then you're always going to be going cap in hand to platforms who are probably don't share the same outlook that you do from a business perspective. And the final point there is embedding equality. So we have a Premier League equality standard, which all the clubs buy into, and actually some of the Championship clubs who've been recently elevated buy into. It's embedding equality principles throughout the club, and it's quite competitive. There's advanced level, intermediate, and beginners level, and all the clubs actually want to get to advanced level, and that's around policies and processes, around recruitment of staff as well. Because if you look around the average staff of a football club, it's not always as diverse as, you know, even the London club's not always as diverse as some of the communities around them. So we're trying to challenge that through our Premier League equality standard. And that's just how it is in a visual. The aims are obviously we're ambitious targets, so some of these do have targets around a 2 or 3 year period to create pathways. And we think it's a good idea it goes without saying, there's a load of untapped potential within the communities that we're not tapping into. So we need to try and change that. And I think that's a whole game problem. We can do so much, but all the stakeholders, not just ourselves and the PFA, but EFL clubs are important, the FA are important as well. So that's a whole game solution to a whole game problem, really. And that's why for the access for the participants, it's career progression. You think about coaches, players coming out of the game at 35, you've got a whole lifetime of work ahead of you. What you do, and only the fortunate few can retire as millionaires, and I don't think even that's the issue. You've still got to get up in the morning for something. Where do they go to at the end when obviously the career's over? So that's what we're looking at: participants, access opportunities. And then for the clubs, it's increased competitive reputational benefits. There are some clubs doing some really good work, and people within the game know them. Clubs like Brighton, very forward thinking. Obviously Hope Powell's there as the head coach for the female team, and they've done a load of work around their equality standard as well. So they're not the only ones, but I'll just name them as someone, as a club, even off the top of my head, I can point to as in terms of reputational benefits as being a really progressive club. That's it in terms of the slide. Hopefully, is that stop sharing? You can't just see my screen anymore.
Yeah, now we can see you again now, so perfect. Thank you. Thanks for that, Iffy. And if anyone's got any questions, again, are you able to stay around for the quick questions?
Yes, absolutely.
So if people have got questions, if you can start thinking about them, and in about 20 minutes or so, we'll have a Q&A and we can start asking some questions. So thanks once again, Iffy. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Michael Bennett, who's going to, Dr. Michael Bennett, sorry, who's going to talk through some of his findings and reports. But before we do that, there's a short video that we're just going to play. If the technology works.
Monk, what do you say to the family of Dalian Atkinson, PC Monk? Convicted of manslaughter, PC Benjamin Monk left court knowing next week he faces jail. The man he killed, former star footballer Dalian Atkinson, who died after PC Monk tasered him, then kicked him in the head. Days afterwards, he tried to explain why he did it.
And I'd formed the opinion that I was going to, the only way I could keep this man on the ground to ensure our safety, I was going to kick him.
It was a brutal act that even then he was trying to minimise, claiming it was done in self-defence.
So could you describe to me the kick that you did?
Yeah, of course. It was basically right-footed, pulled my right foot back, kicked him in the area which I believe to be a shoulder area. Can I show?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's literally there.
Okay,
there.
Where did that make contact?
I don't know.
The evidence was clear. Marks from the imprints of PC Monk's bootlace were found in 2 places on Dalian Atkinson's forehead. He died soon afterwards. His family have waited nearly 5 years for someone to be held responsible for his death.
It's mainly relief. We're just relieved that it's finally over. It's been a long, really long journey.
On the night that Dalian died, he was vulnerable and unwell and he needed medical attention. Instead, he received violence and died with PC Monk's bootlace prints bruised on his forehead. We have been sickened to hear PC Monk try to minimise the force he used on Dalian and exaggerate the threat that Dalian posed.
On the night Dalian Atkinson died, police were called by a neighbour of his father in Telford.
Control room. Hello? Hello. I'm not sure what's actually happening, but I've just heard some noise. So my husband looked out the window, and there's a car pulled up outside an old man's house, and then there was somebody shouting, and then he went back to his car, and then he went back to the door, kicked it, and told the bloke he better let him in, because he's dead, and he's just gone and opened the door and he's gone in. So I'm a little worried.
When the police arrived, there was a confrontation. PC Monk used his taser. The first time he fired it, it didn't work. He fired it a second time. Again, no effect. But when he fired it the third time, it did work. Dalian Atkinson fell into the road. PC Monk continued to hold the trigger. The taser was deployed for 33 seconds. The normal cycle of a taser is just 5 seconds. The Independent Office of Police Conduct confirmed a review of taser use is currently underway. The jury are still considering their verdict in the case of PC Mary Ellen Betley-Smith, who's on trial for assault. The Assistant Chief Constable of West Mercia Police gave her reaction to the conviction of PC Monk.
Words alone cannot express the deep shock and regret that I feel that I must stand here and address you today because a West Mercia police officer has been found criminally responsible for Dalian's death.
This is the first conviction of a serving officer for manslaughter following a death during police contact in England for more than 30 years. For the Atkinson family, it's brought justice for Dalian. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Telford.
If you wear glasses or contact.
Okay, so Michael, are you there? You're on mute.
Afternoon all.
Thank you.
I believe Colin is was meant to be asking me some questions.
Yeah, can you hear me, Michael?
Yes, I can, yes.
Yeah, so firstly, can I apologise if I offended by the use of the term murder, but I think that's a term felt in the black community where, unfortunately, the overuse of forces has led to 30 black people, men, have died in custody. Also, with the Mental Health Act, black men are 4 times more likely to be sectioned, misdiagnosed and restrained. And yesterday, Michael did an excellent presentation looking at 2 cases, Ardia Lewis, whose son was restrained and killed, and also Sean Riggs, who's actually restrained and killed. And I know we've got an excellent ambassador on the line, Carl Lyle, who's actually talked a lot about these issues. At the moment, the PFA have been revolutionary in addressing issues around mental health. But firstly, after watching that emotive film, Michael, I mean, how did it make you feel, and how did it affect the profession?
Afternoon all. For me, as I spoke about yesterday, it was quite emotional to the fact that a young man his life has been taken. For me, what brought on more than anything else is that I actually played with Dalian, and I played against Dalian, and it was stark for me because we were both the same age. We were both black men, and obviously this incident happened where his life's been taken. So it had a real big impact on me, and so it's hard because watching that video showcases how brutal the kind of situation was that he was faced with. We did a lot of work with the family, the PFA, and I did a lot of work with his partner at the time, Karen, in terms of emotional support. So for me, it really was, it hit me deep. I said yesterday in the meeting yesterday, we talked about Marcia and IG's, children dying at the hands of police. And it's just, watching that today just brought back, those feelings again. So, very emotional for me.
Michael, you've been revolutionary. You just finished your PhD. You've written a number of articles for The Lancet, which is the national publication around mental health. One of your articles about unmasking how we feel about mental health. I'm just, what the FA doing, or the PFA doing, in terms of mental health, in terms of the impact of online abuse, racial abuse, discrimination, and inequality? What do you think the PFA are doing and need to do?
Well, my colleague Simone Pound spoke perfectly earlier on in regards to the Enough campaign and in regards to the support that we're trying to implement in regards to the social media platforms and take them to hold them accountable for the stuff that's taking place with our members and players. For me, the key element for me was that, as an organisation, we need to listen to the voices of the players. What we try to move from, particularly in the wellbeing department, which I've been running from since 2011, was that we felt that the emotional side of the game needed to be more impactful, needed to be more implemented in terms of being on the same level as a physical injury. So we know clubs do a lot of work around making their players physically fit, but wasn't enough for me personally, that emotionally there wasn't enough support there. And as a player of 20 years, I encountered my own emotions in a 20-year career, that I felt that if there was emotional support in place, there might have been, I might have maybe been able to reach the potential that I had. So the key for me was to implement a private and confidential support service for players, that they could go away and be, away from family, away from the football club, and seek this solace in seeking support. So that was the main aim behind the department in 2011. Gordon Taylor was instrumental in getting that implemented for me. Clark at the time was instrumental in helping us get that embedded in place. And we just grown from strength to strength. And as you can probably see from the numbers that that we've had over the 2016, we had 160 people use the service. 2017, we had 403 people use the service. 2018, we had a jump to 438, and to 2019, we had a jump to 658. And in 2020, we went down to 503. And the reason it went down to 503 was because we were in the middle of a pandemic, and we realized that a number of individuals weren't able to make the phone calls because they weren't able to have a private setting and comfortable to make those phone calls. So you can see that from our standpoint, what we originally intended to do in terms of getting players to receive emotional support has worked and continues to work. And I think the jump in 2017, from 160 to 403, I think that was down to the first PFA Mental Health and Wellbeing Conference at St George's Park, where we invited staff to attend. We invited one staff member from each club to attend, just so we could showcase what the work we were doing at the PFA and how players could access the support, and hoping that clubs will go back to their clubs and make the players aware of this, make the other staff members aware of this. So that was beneficial. And we also had players in the afternoon speaking about their experiences around emotional well-being and the issues that they faced. And we had the likes of Stephen Corker, We had the likes of Chris Kirkland, Gemma Bonner from Man City at the time. We had Fabrice from Rambler talking, Richie Humphries, who was former PFA chairman, and Darren Moore talking from a coach perspective. So we had a real kind of real diverse mixture of individuals talking about their experiences. And I think when the staff members heard the experience that players have gone through and what they would like to implement, that was a massive change as well. And alongside that, Dr. King, was the implementation of our player wellbeing workshops. And we just felt that we were sending out information to clubs around the wellbeing support that players can receive, but we just felt that it wasn't sifting right down to the relevant people and down to the players. So the idea behind the workshop was that we got in front of the players and spoke with them directly about what the player wellbeing department does at the PFA, what mental health looks like from a football context, and how these individuals can access this service and support. And that's kind of how we went about it. So I think the big jump was that we were getting and they were able to get the contact details from us, and they can make contact directly with us. So, as I said, the emotional side of the game for me was important. And going on to the races, as I mentioned, I really felt that we needed to have a designated helpline number for players that received abuse, whether it be online or whether it be directly to them, that they could have this space where they knew that it was private and confidential, that we have the relevant therapists that were skilled in this area of dealing with racism, that could deal with our players and help our players in the current situations, and and making it a safe place for them to make contact with us. And the clubs knew about the number, and the players knew about the number, and that has worked. And that number and that people coming on to us and access support is grown. So yeah, we just continue to keep pushing on. As I said, as you mentioned about my thesis was about understanding the lived experience of mental health and professional footballers in the UK. And we kind of sourced 12 players to kind of pick their brains about their experiences who've used the service. And one of the things that came out of it, which is a separate piece of research, I believe, was that when we spoke to the black players and they spoke about their own experience around racism, how the mental impact had on them and trauma that they hadn't addressed or hadn't worked through. And I just felt that this is something that we need to look at maybe in future.
Just one more question. Is that okay, Lee, before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
What you've undermined is the great data that is showing, and I think Clark will agree with this, that our clubs equipped to deal with mental health, particularly around race. In society at the moment, we know there is a real difficulty in engaging with therapeutic services and with mental health services. And your survey showed quite clearly, and I think we need to look at the grassroots. Have we got the services in place to really respond to the racism that Black young children are suffering in the school system, in the academy structure, in the football structure, and particularly the women's game as well, which we really haven't addressed today?
I think, I can only talk from the professional game. I know we do a little bit of work with the 9 to 16s and at clubs, but from the professional game, we can always do more. I think, as you mentioned there, and if you mentioned as well earlier on that, we have I think about 30% of the playing population is 30% is people of colour. And we asked a question about, do we have the discourse in regards to coaches and managers in that area is nowhere the same. But also, if you look from a cultural perspective, and this is what I'm picking up from players when we speak to them, they're players that are coming forward and seeking support are coming forward because they feel that they will be understood because of their cultural experiences and because of what they're doing in regards to the abuse they've ever received. So we can always do more. We need to do more. We're working together with different stakeholders to do more. It's not working in silo. It's working together to make sure that the clubs, players, and the PFA members, receive the best support that we can possibly offer them, and that's what we're aiming to do. So, there's still work to be done. A piece of research that me and Dr. King have been speaking about is to, speak with the players, the Black players in particular, and just to see, from their experiences, what they would like to be implemented. I think we have to move, and we have moved away from a service-led approach, which is, in the early days, it was me implementing what I felt needed to be in place for players because of my experience of playing the game. I think we've had to move away from the service-led approach to a needs-led approach where we're asking the players what it is they want. And every time we deliver a workshop, and we delivered 50 workshops last year and received like 10,000 pieces of data, it showed we were asking the players what it is they want. What does that look like? so we can implement it from a needs-led approach rather than a service-led approach. So we're working on that way. We're working with helping the players get the players' voices heard and empower the players so we can implement the relevant support they need.
Great. Last comment into one sentence. Somebody I've been restrained and had mental health problems. What's the best memorial we can actually put in place to Dalian, his memory, and what he meant to us in the game?
I think as a collective, we need to speak to each other about that. I think first we need to speak to his family first and see what thoughts they may have in regards to that, and then just working with them and working with the football stakeholders, his former clubs, Aston Villa, Sheffield United, and looking at what that might look like. So that's a conversation to have, which I can not a problem having a conversation with his family and his girlfriend Karen, and we can look at what that looks like and we can implement that, not a problem.
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much for changing the face of mental health in football. You've been a revolutionary. Thank you very much. And Clark, who's been one of the instigators. Thanks very much for that, Lee. And thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, are you okay to stay around for the Q&A as well?
Yeah, it's fine, Lee, no problem at all.
Perfect, thank you. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a 10-minute break now, so if everyone can come back about 13 minutes past 1. We're going to have a question and answer, so think about your questions you want to ask any of the panelists. We're also going to have 2 new people join us in Kevin Coleman from Brentford FC and Danny Lynch from the Irish FA, formerly of the FA and Kick It Out. They're going to join the panel as well. We may just ask them a few questions to start with before we kick off. But if you could come back in 10 minutes, that'd be great. When you do have your break, if you could just make sure you're on mute and turn your cameras off, that would be great. See you shortly. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Just Jacob and Lauren, you can hear me okay, yeah? Yeah, I think that.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to go into a Q&A session. I've got a couple of questions that came through via the chat earlier, but we do have 3 people that have come join the panel in addition to the speaker. So we've got Kevin Coleman from Brentford, we've got Danny Lynch from the Irish FA, and we've also now got Steve Smithies, who is currently the CEO of Cheshire FA, but formerly the Football Association, who worked in coach development and coach education. So, Colin, did you have any questions you wanted to ask Kevin, Danny, and Steve to start with?
Yeah, just quick question. We have time. I'm going to start with my good friend Kevin, who has had an illustrious career in Kick It Out. Now gave me a T-shirt for Brentford. Thank you very much for Kevin. Kevin, I really admire your perspective and where we are from. There's a great book written by Michael Holding this week about taking a knee and what do we do when we rise. What's Brentford attempting to do to address race equality?
Sorry, Colin, was it a question about race, about equality and inclusion, or taking the knee?
Standing from taking the knee, what do we do next in terms of addressing race equality in our organisation?
Yeah, so I think taking the knee is quite a complex subject, and I think it's one where I think sometimes the complexity and nuances are lost on the general public, and the media and some groups can often skew it to their own ends. It has a long history, not just from Colin Kaepernick, but going back in time to Martin Luther King and lots of other people, as a legitimate sign of protest against the status quo and against institutional racism. I think last year, partly because of what happened to the murder of George Floyd, but also I think there's a wider frustration with discrimination in society, and that came together, and it was a way that players could communicate their displeasure at the current status quo. We often malign on players, but they're in a very difficult position. The only time we generally see them are in matches and in post-match interviews. So for them to use their platform during the match time, during the match day, is a really prominent way of doing it, and it's a way of, in a unified way, making a symbol, making a gesture, saying that they all, as a group, are not happy with discrimination within society and within football. And I think the question is right there, because there was a lot of momentum when it first happened. And I think that the legitimate question a lot of people ask is what next? So I think taking the knee is a good thing. Lots of people have different opinions on it, but generally, because the intention is right, and because it's the key point is that more people are talking about it more. I think that's the main point, the main benefit that's come from it. But the question is, we've been doing it a year or so, and all the players are doing it. And I think people should now not be talking about if players are taking the knee or what a policy is on taking the knee. They should be looking to decision makers, whether it be in football or in social media platforms or in government, to say, look, what are you doing next? You know, players have played their part, campaigners have played their part, the society has spoken, whether it be on social media or elsewhere. And I think the key question now is, what progression, what do you do next? And it's a way, I guess, of trying to hold people accountable. You know, people in positions of power who have made lots of strong statements. People have said zero tolerance a million times, but I'm not sure the actions of lots of institutions and groups have tallied with that. So I think, yeah, that's my general thoughts on taking the knee. I think it's not the specifics of the gesture. It's more the conversations that it creates and the accountability that it can create as to what's next.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really excellent analysis. I think we can talk later about the Brentford context in terms of how we're benchmarking our reality against that. Just want to go to my great friend Danny Lynch, who has had an inspired career from Kick It Out to the FA, and I think that's really an important transition. Danny, what's your analysis of where we are in terms of addressing racism in your journey and the importance of this symbolic use of taking a knee?
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Colin. Great to be on the call. Thank you for the invite. Good to see Iffy and Michael and Simone and Steve just popped up there. People I've known for a long time, people I've got a lot of love and respect for. So it's esteemed company. If I could just say the Dalian Atkinson clip that Michael showed was a tough watch. I don't know if that's been acknowledged. I was just a little bit late coming into the meeting there, but I found that hard. But I thought it was completely necessary. Sometimes these things need to be a bit shocking for you to be reminded of the how impactful they are to different people. So I guess thanks, Michael, for sharing that, because I think it was needed. I guess in very broad strokes, my journey has gone from whippersnapper from the north of England, parachuted into a job at Kick It Out, where I learned so much, and I actually still dip back into that well of things I learned during that 6 or 7 years I was there, onto the FA, and now at the Irish FA. So I'm based in Belfast now. Most FAs are sort of similar. So the Irish FA is, you know, structurally is probably the same as the Scottish FA, and actually the FA, they just differ in scope and scale and size. What I would say about Northern Ireland is that identity is really important. I've worked at places before where identity is important, and the people who are connected to those organisations feel that identity is important. In Northern Ireland, that's no different, but it's based on religious lines. The traditional, if you like, not to give a potted history about Northern Irish politics, but you're Catholic or you're Protestant, you know, and that is a very crude way of looking at things. The census that's going to come out will actually show that there's an emerging ethnic minority community. So I think that's going to be really interesting to the already rich cultural diversity that I think there is in Northern Ireland, because there is going to be new faces and new backgrounds in that. And I think that will only add to, you know, what is already a really good cultural mix, not without its problems, as we know, but then show me a place that isn't without problems. It's challenges, and we've got to try and overcome them. Football's a great way of doing that. Our teams have taken the knee in Northern Ireland. It's a place that isn't immune to conflict, and It's a place where people feel like they need to take a stand and be aligned to injustice. And I think a lot of people in Northern Ireland understand that taking the knee is the right thing to do. And I don't want to echo completely or lampoon what Kev said, but I sort of agree. And I think most people probably on the call would probably agree we're in favour of it. We think it's the right thing to do. We think it's a strong movement. And, you know, as somebody who works in the communication space, just look at how much debate has come from it, how many column inches have come from it, some of the conversations that have sprung from that one gesture. People are talking about it. We're having a webinar about it, you know. So I think it's wholly important and something that we can all ride in behind. I guess lastly on that point, people might think, well, why is a guy representing Northern Ireland or the island of Ireland on here talking about something like this? Well, I know at least 3 people on this call whose family came from Ireland, and they probably endured a bit of discrimination and a bit of mickey taking and people poking fun at them. Happened in my family. Links between England and Ireland are really, really close. Thing that binds us is football. So that's why I'm here, and it's good to see people that I've known for a long time and I respect. So it's me for now, Colin.
Danny, that's a really emotional insight. Can I just congratulate you and Kevin as 2 white examples who we worked with, that we stood side by side in this painful journey. And there are others like Les Harriet, the FA, Sue. There was also, I think this is a collective across the colour line struggle. But I want to go to my friend and colleague, Steve Smithy. Hopefully you can hear me, Steve.
Hi, Colin.
Steve.
Okay?
So we've got a big celebration. Steve Smithy, I think, is the only chief executive of an FA county in the whole country. And I think as a celebration, he's only the 2nd one historically that we actually had. That won't get me a tracksuit, but it's really important that I make that announcement. There was a variety of questions I could ask Steve, and there's one of them: how do we get a predominantly white workforce to engage in the struggle about race equality? But secondly, your substantial experience around race equality and coaching at grassroots. I mean, how important is that now as an issue?
Thanks, Colin. And like I say, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. Apologies for being late. And I've had a few Wi-Fi problems, which are probably Lee shares my pain with that, and VPN crashing. First question, Colin, I would ask people to have a look at, if you're not already aware of it, it's a really good piece by Derek Bell on interest convergence. I think that's really interesting, and sharing, getting allies and getting people from different communities. Let's just say the white working class male community in this stage. How do we get them interested in some of the shared ideas and objectives that a South Asian community has, or a Black Afro-Caribbean community has, or an LGBT community has? How do we get them interested? And I think that it's as ever, Colin, it's around education, and it's around seeing the benefits of collaboration and co-production, co-construction, and sharing those benefits, Colin. It's not the benefits aren't always easy to see. From where I sit at the moment as a chief executive's perspective, there are huge commercial benefits that just make good business sense to be inclusive and to actually share common goals around participation, around people signing up to education courses, around commercial partners investing in us, Colin. But actually, interest convergence is really important because people don't always understand, Colin, that we actually do have lots of interests, and we've got to sell those interests sometimes. I think the other part of having a predominantly white workforce, which I have one here, is understanding. I think the vast majority of people, their heart is in the right place, and they're good people. A lot of it is around just demystifying some of the language. Kev Coleman's been great for me in demystifying some of the language around Islam, around the Muslim faith. I'm able to talk to him about it. What does this mean? How do I pronounce that? When do I use this in context? It's going to make people feel comfortable, Colin, and maybe have some psychological safety around You can talk to us about our community, and equally we can talk to you about your community. And let's not perhaps hang people out to dry or introduce cancel culture because people have said the wrong word. I've shared with Colin many times that I'm not easily offended because I don't think people intend to offend. I think when people are trying to offend you, and then you should be offended. Not sure if that answers the question, Colin. I can't hear you, brother.
You're on.
Thank you very much.
That should be a fine, Lee. That should be a £10 fine.
Yeah, I've been fined all my life, so this feels like with a white black agreeing with a white chief executive, I'm really concerned about where this is going in terms of taking the knee.
But just convergence right there.
Yeah, convergence right there. That's really pathologically. But let's talk about coaching. I mean, if he's talking about coaching in the professional game, in the grassroots, are there real opportunities for addressing race equality, the underrepresentation at the higher end, transition to UEFA, pro license, but also more importantly, employment and given the opportunity?
My concern at the moment, Colin, is the short answer is that there's. Do you know what, Colin? I'm not sure. I'm a bit worried at the moment that I don't think we're going backwards in spirit, and I don't think we're going backwards in ambition, but we might be going backwards in presence, and we might be going backwards in role models and real models, because I just feel that we may not be doing enough around the grassroots space, particularly around coach education, Colin, to make sure there are enough role models and real models and people who can join the dots and actually connect. I think if you want to learn something about a community, then you need to either come from it or immerse yourself in it. I don't think it's easy to do. So if we say we want more Black and Asian boys and girls into football, or we want more people from the LGBT community or the disability community, I think there's a point where you can encourage that. Then there comes a point where you have to enable that through activism, through being part of that community, to actually understand the language, understand the culture. It's the difference between, performative, where we just put out, we put out nice posters and banners saying everybody's welcome. That's just performative. It's just that's all it is. But what are you actually doing? The difference between, nobody ever says they're racist, ever. Yeah, but then ask somebody if they're anti-racist, because they don't know how to explain that either. What do you actually do? And this is where I worry for grassroots at the moment, Colin. We've got to make sure, Colin, especially coming out of a really difficult period for all communities, and let's not forget the disability community was affected the most by COVID. They've been absolutely affected the most, and they still remain affected. And not that far behind would be a lot of other ethnically diverse communities who have been affected. And they've not just been affected by the disease, they've been affected by the system and society and the structures that have completely let them down, because they've felt isolated and they felt undervalued and unloved. And they've lost a particular generation has been extremely vulnerable and has passed away. So that's a difficult time. So how do we re-engage, reconnect? How do we make sure grassroots, Colin, reflects? I'm really keen that we do that through allyship. We do that through actual connections, by inviting people in, by talking to people and engaging people and speaking a language that they understand, not a corporate language, but a real language where we involve people. And I'm not sure if we're doing that enough at the moment, is the honest answer. The will and the intent is there, but I'm not actually sure that's happening.
Great. I think that opens it up to the question and answer section. That's excellent. Thank you for that, Steve.
Thanks.
Brilliant.
Colin?
Go on, Danny.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Steve said there about immersed in it, whatever it is. Couldn't agree more. That's what I did when I first joined Kick It Out, and you have to want to do it, and you have to have a real appetite to do it, because most often than not, if you want to do it, and you have the right, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound sort of approach, and you say to somebody, do you know what, I really want to learn about you and I'm going to spend the afternoon with you. Most people will go, yeah, all right. You know, they'd be quite chuffed about that. Some people will tell you to bugger off, but other people will see that as a bit of a compliment because you're showing interest in them. So it's a human nature thing as much as anything else. But just by using words like allyship and so on, but spending time with people to understand them a bit more on a personal level, on a cultural level. And it's amazing the things that come out of the back of that. And Kev and I, John, kick it out on the same day, actually, but I guess he was probably further along his journey in that space than I was, because he was from Harrow and I was from like Humberside. So, you know, just as a consequence, you fraternize with people from different communities and walks of life in a place like Harrow rather than you would where I was from. So I always felt like I probably had a bit to do in that space, but I wanted to do it anyway, you know, and ultimately that's what it comes down to. If you want to do it, people will let you in.
Thanks, Danny. I think Kevin wanted to come in.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to agree with Steve and Danny. And actually, that's one thing I found in the last sort of 6 months at Brentford, that there are a lot of people who do want to learn and who do have an appetite for, let's call it inclusion. But I think this is a bit where we come in. Our role is to facilitate that, and it's to create, I don't know what you call it, organic connection. You almost need to create the environment where people are able to naturally meet and learn from other people. I think the FA has done loads of good work and has loads of good programs in place, but they're just creating the framework. It's when the people meet and people meet other people and understand what it's like to be in their shoes, and then they have real empathy, and that is the trigger point. That's when you've succeeded. It's not when you've got the numbers of coaches. I think the more bursary programs, the more programs that try and get more coaches at a higher level, they're almost creating that framework. And I think once you normalise, for example, having more Black and Asian coaches in the pro game, then you've created that inclusive environment, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think our role is to almost, when you've got, for example, like Brentford, you've got majority white staff who are really keen and interested in the subject, but don't quite know where to go, not quite sure what to say, a little bit scared of talking about a certain subject. So, and that's come home this week. We've been, for Black History Month, we've had discussion groups where we've brought in a really good facilitator, and we just put people in the room with him. And 2 hours later, they're suddenly talking about something they haven't spoken about for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's about creating those safe spaces and organic environments where people's goodwill can then flourish.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so I'm going to open it up now. So if I could ask Michael, Colin and Iffy, if you could turn your cameras on. And I'm just going to open up to anyone on the call now that would like to ask a question. You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll come to you. So while you're thinking, I'll kick off. To address Alan Barrett's point around how serious are the FA dealing with the same situation within players and coaches at grassroots level. So, you know, the FA are very serious. And all county FAs, will manage incidents as and when they occur. The good thing now is there's a consistent panel that are hearing cases, so we can get consistency across the country to try and make sure that all cases of discrimination are reported, investigated, and punished or educated in the right way. So Alan, very serious is the answer to the question. Clark, I think you've got a question.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to see you all.
Hey, Clark.
fantastic people on this call. You know, when we have Black History Month, we usually have things born out of a tragedy, talking about George Floyd, talking about Daley and Atkinson. But what Steve was saying there about having role and real models, I hope everyone on this call appreciates that we've got 4 modern day pioneers on this call. Yourself, Dr. King, Dr. Bennett, Simone, Iffy. You know, you are leaders who have forged a path for the likes of me to try and creep in the back door. I wholly appreciate the work that each and every one of you have done for decades. I just hope everyone appreciates the caliber that's on this call. And I was fortunate enough to ask you my question, Simone, in real time, but I've got a question for Dr. Bennett and for Iffy. Iffy, the Premier League are doing fantastic work in those initiatives that you highlighted there. They're very much outward facing. And my question aligns with what Kev just said. You know, Brentford in West London is not a very Caucasian area, yet itself as a very Caucasian staff. So what about the Premier League itself? What's its inward facing strategy? Because we know the representation on the staff there as an organisation isn't what it should be. And for yourself, Dr. Bennett, mate, I've got vicarious pride there. I shouldn't have it, but it's amazing. So great work, Mickey. With regards to the player welfare aspect of it and the psychological aspect, it's so hard to overcome that alpha male dominated environment to get players to communicate. But what I've seen in my experience is there's an added barrier when you bring the cultural divide into it, which put simply, you know, it's effectively a generational effect of you don't talk about our business outside this house. It is the unintended consequence of what the Windrush generation experienced coming over here, but it plays out in a total inability for guys of our generation to communicate anything, least of all what all our prejudices already are about adverse mental health. So how do we tackle that caveat within the football space when it's hard enough to get guys to open up already?
Let me go first, because you're on mute.
No problem.
So Clark, yeah, you're right, and it's great to see you, mate. This is you're right. This was an issue for me when I first came into the game of football, and you know, obviously once I started to become a therapist and started to train as a therapist, and you go into your first introduction to therapy, you have your check-in, as it were, and people start talking about their lives and issues that they've got going on, and I'm sitting there stunned and shocked that people are talking openly about their own personal issues. And it took me, I'm going to be honest, it took me about 6 weeks of a 12-week course to fully trust myself to engage in this private confidential setting. So we do have the issue around the cultural issue around players in the game having that mindset of what goes on in the yard stays in the yard mentality. But what we're trying to do and trying to break that stigma is that, you know, we're not dealing with a footballer, we're dealing with a person here. We're dealing with a whole holistic person, whether you're black, white, mixed race, whatever. We're dealing with a person here, and we're just trying to get the individual to recognise that we will pair you with a therapist that we feel will fit with you and with the presenting issues that you're presenting with. That's the key behind it. So when a player, whether it's black, white, mixed race, comes onto us and expresses an issue that they've got going on, you know, our triage service looks into that and knows this, and will then pair that individual with a relevant therapist on a network. Now, don't get me wrong, Clark, we need more therapists of colour. I'm not going to lie to you and sit here and say we've got the therapists of colour on a network. We've got 240 therapists on a network, and I would say maybe 10% of that, off the top of my head, are therapists of colour, which is not bad. But if we're talking about the 30% of players playing the game of colour in the game now, the therapists that we have in place, it isn't enough. So, you know, we're just trying to showcase that, you know, the players that, you know, if you ask for a black therapist or white therapist or male or female or a former player or current player, we will try our hardest best to get you that relevant therapist that will be in line with what you're presenting, but also make it as comfortable as possible for you to feel that you can offload and talk about whatever's going on. So I think that's the aim. You know, I've still got work to do, and me and Dr. King have been talking about this and trying to get, you know, We've got a counselling course that we've got going on. This is the third one that we've been doing now. And the last cohort, out of the 8, 7 of them are black therapists and former players. So, you know, that's going to help us kind of make the ratio a bit more better in the network of counsellors. But, you know, in terms of the cultural issues and getting players to understand this, when I go and do workshops at clubs and talk to players about our service, I do bring this up. That, you know, as a black man in the Caribbean family, Jamaican family, you are told not to talk about anything outside of the household. But we've got to break that stigma, because it's stopping you from receiving the relevant support that helps you as a person and then as a footballer. So that's how we're trying to do it, mate.
Hi, Clark. Great to see you, my friend. Talking about the Premier League, I think about a year ago, and so forgive me exact numbers, but there was less than 100 staff at the Premier League. From what I can gather now, the staffing is around 150. So there's been a real swell of numbers by over a third in the last months, and obviously I was one of them. And you know, when you join an organisation, you assume that everyone's been there forever, and it's only when you realise that people join more or less the same as you, or even since I've been there, and I've been in place 6 months. Regarding the specific demographics, you're absolutely right, and it's something that the Premier League are aware of, that their own workforce needs to more accurately reflect the diversity of London, the football industry, etc., etc. So I know that's very much a conversation we've had, and I would imagine a lot of the people who've come in the last 6 months or so, the last year, has been around some of those challenges. So that's not me putting my corporate head on. I'm actually kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I can kind of look at it and say, yeah, it needs to happen. But yes, some of it is starting to happen as well, and long overdue.
Thanks, Iffy. Thanks, Michael. Chris Ampofo, you had your hand up next.
Thanks very much, Lee, and thanks everybody for a very interesting debate. Going back to what Simone said, she mentioned the 4 Ps of players, parliament, platform and police. I would just like to maybe throw in another P, playground. And that is to say, I wonder if more resources should be channeled towards schools, because I think the racism thing is an education piece. And it seems like I know there's amazing work being done, but I just want to put it to the floor. Should more resources be put into the schools as an early intervention? A lot of the work is after it's happened, supporting players when they're abused. What about if we tried to make a multi-agency approach and make an early intervention and get into the schools and educate the young people? Thanks, Lee.
Simone, would you like? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say 100%, couldn't agree more. As a mother and someone who has worked closely with education programmes, whether that's through Show Racism and the Red Card, or more recently, to give Iffy some credit, the No Room for Racism resources that are being used in schools now. Education is everything. However, it's something that we've said for many years as well. So it's about really, I really liked what you said, Steve, about enabling through activism. So I consider all of us on this call activists. I believe the players taking the knee is effectively activism. And what I'd like to see beyond taking the knee is really enabling some strong action and resourcing schools. I mean, the government that we've got currently, education, particularly state education, is so significantly under-resourced. I've seen firsthand the impact and issues that are around young people in education, and that impacts itself through grassroots. My colleague Fabrice Mwamba, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me referencing, his son got monkey chanted playing a rugby game. Where do we go from here? Like, that's the young kids monkey chanting other young kids. Some serious stuff needs to happen with young people.
Yeah, just to follow up on Simone's stuff, I mean, that is part of what we try and do, you know, via the community clubs. There's a lot of work being done with those community programs, which the PFA as well, the Premier League, get involved in as well. And it is aimed a lot at the young people. I would also give credit to people who aren't represented here, like Show Races and the Red Card. They do some great events specifically around school-aged children, primary school children.
But I do, Iffy, do you agree much more could and should?
Oh, of course. And when we talk about education, you know, in some ways, I think the current generation and younger get it, and younger. Some of the education has to be at the older age group. You know, there's some entrenched views there. Now, whether you're going to change them all is a moot point, but whether some of those topics of conversation, uncomfortable as they are, need to be taking place at a much more mature level with more mature people. I'd argue that very specifically some of the work that's done with perpetrators of abuse is on an education program. You're educating 50-plus-year-old men about issues of race. Now, is that their fault, or is that society's fault that some of the issues about race that the young kids are learning now at a young age, they're learning for the first time? So somewhere along the way, the education program as it is has not been fit for purpose in equipping people of my age, my generation, unless I was born in the skin I was, with the necessary knowledge and understanding of the whole issue of race in this country. I'm hopeful that, and spent time last week at a couple of clubs, Everton particularly, listening to the conversations there, speaking to the teachers there, blown away by the depth of knowledge and the kind of things they're coming out with. I just wish there was the same depth of knowledge and understanding from slightly older people as well. But yeah, absolutely, can never be too much work to be done.
Thanks. If it's Simone, Kevin, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I got 3 points before I forget them all. I was going to big up there for the Premier League. Actually, I think what they're doing around Primary League stars and for it is really, really good. And I think that's a really good way of trying to influence schools. I think, for example, in the last month, we've done about 20, 25 schools. We've done a tour with Marcus Gale and Salma, so a lady from our women's team, with the championship trophy around Black History Month, and that's all funded by Premier League. So I think you could always fund more, but I think it's been a big increase in work from the Premier League through the trust, which has been really good. I think there will always be people pointing towards the behaviour of players. So I think the way the language players use, the way they harass referees, etc., that is directly replicated on grassroots and in playgrounds. And I think that's probably something where we could work a bit more on. And actually, one question I went back to, I think the PLEDIS, that if everyone knows what that means, is the Premier League's equality standard, is really, really good. It's a big upgrade on the generic equality standard, and I've been really impressed with it. I was going to ask Iffy if the Premier League is going through that certification itself. I actually didn't know, so I just thought I'd check in if the Premier League is going to go through its own equality standard.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation we've had, Kevin, internally about that, and because it's changed from the equality standard. It used to be called, it's now called the PLEDIS. It used to be just called equality standard. Now it's the Premier League Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Standard. So we've, on what we've done with that, we've made it some of those levels more stringent, and actually we're looking at ways to use the PLEDIS vehicle to challenge clubs further. So what PLEDIS does, it speaks to probably one half of the club, the operational side, around the policies and processes and around recruitment. And like you said, it's really good in itself. But what it hasn't touched upon enough possibly is the first team environment and academy environment to a lesser extent. So looking at ways to do that. In terms of PLEDIS itself, whether it would be PLEDIS itself and holding ourselves accountable to PLEDIS, or whether it's through the Football Leaders Diversity Code from the FA, we're definitely in that conversation about making sure that we as an organisation are as accountable internally, which is a little bit following on from the question that came earlier from Chris, I think, about the Premier League workforce as well.
Cool.
Thank you both. Danny Lynch was next.
Yes, just a quick note on the back of Chris's comment. I remember when I first joined the FA, and I naively thought that the FA education department meant other things other than just coaching. And when I found out, it was just, I say just, I'm not trying to reduce it, but I guess education is all encompassing, and Chris, it probably doesn't apply to early years, but do think there's a moment in time where the FA, and I can say this because I don't work there anymore, you know, needs to amplify and add to what its education offering is. And if that's looking at more cerebral issues or looking at pioneers, Albert Johansson, Arthur Wharton, there's been loads of stuff done by Red Card and kicking out the PFA about those individuals. Why isn't that embedded a little bit more into the education department of the FA as the guardians of the game, the custodians of the game, was supposed? Is that a conversation to be had? Is that something that needs to be discussed and developed a little bit more? Something that I've thought about, and you know, I think there's value in it, but it's not something that would come under my desk anymore.
No. Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Danny. Thank you.
Right, Colin, got your hand up?
Yeah, so Clark has put something in the chat, and for me, as a radical person who was a student of the Black Panther movement, one of the things I really want to say, I'm probably going to be unpopular, and that's why I never get a job in football, is that the systems and structures that have transmitted from slavery to colonialism are now an essential part of our systems and structures in football, and they've never been dismantled. The way the game is managed, the way it's organized, in the way it's invested, the people that have power as well. And it's really important that that be dismantled, because equality is a really important thing. I think equity is even more crucial, that we be to develop pathways and structures and democratic structures that really empower people to be part of football, not to be marginalized by opportunities like the bursaries that deal with numbers, but the educational system in which we are educated has not changed at all. And Steve talked about coach education in society. It is predominantly Eurocentric. It comes from a white-centric perspective, and it actually demonizes and pathologizes. And these are the sort of things that lead into the murders and the violations of Black people in communities, and also the new slavery in football, where footballers, Black footballers particularly, are seen as commodities rather than people with capital. And if that sounds radical, I don't apologize. That gets me sent off this structure, but we got to get a message that this is a fight, and the memorial today, Dalian, is the fight to do that. That's why I came into football. It wasn't just about the football. The football is a vehicle to addressing other inequalities and social justice as well. But I'm going to end in positive. I am overwhelmed with the people that have come here today, and we undermine the power we have collectively to stand together and to come together across the professional game and the grassroots games to really change race equality. So that's my positive message today. And I'm really, really pleased that everybody's turned up. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. There's just two more things in the chat, then we'll bring it to a close. Simone, Thomas Fletcher has asked whether he could connect with you outside of the call with regards to the project he's working on. Is that okay if we connect the two? Thank you. And Charlotte from QPR has said, great webinar today, thanks to all the speakers. So she's highlighted that Sport and Equals are leading on a race reputation index, which is being pushed out to NGBs and PL clubs. I think she's put a link in the chat as well. So please look at that link, and maybe that's something that IAG can look at and review at your next meeting as well, Colin. I think that'd be a good next step, as Charlie refers to. So unless anyone's got any burning questions, I just want to say a big thanks to everyone for attending. Hopefully you found the information that's been shared thought-provoking, and hopefully if you think of anything post this call, please do get in contact with Colin and others on the call. And like I say, our Inclusion Advisory Group is there to check and challenge us as an organisation to try and make Middlesex football truly representative. So we need to keep these conversations ongoing, not just come together for a seminar once a year. We need to make sure that these conversations are ongoing. So thank you, and a big thank you to all the speakers. I know you've got incredibly busy schedules. I know Danny's flown over from Belfast to Manchester today for the draw, so thanks for joining. I know Kevin's in his car going between meetings, so I do thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. I thank you, and I wish you all the best for the remainder of the season. Thank you.
All the best, everyone.
Thanks, Colin.
See everyone, well done.